Bienvenidos, everyone who is joining us live for this conversation on the PROACT's attack on independent contracting. My name is Yvette Diaz, and I work with Libre, the Libre Initiative, which is a national organization dedicated to empowering the Hispanic community and driving freedom-based solutions for the benefit of all. And we are here today to have this very important conversation, specifically with those of you who work as independent contractors, either if that's your full-time job or it's something that you do on the side, because we really believe that it's a thriving element of our economy. And we want to protect that right, especially in our Hispanic community, where we know so many have that el espíritu emprendedor, that entrepreneurial spirit, to start working with whatever it is that they may have, whatever skill it may be, whatever product it may be that they are able to make, from the beauty industry to the agricultural industry. There are so many who rely on independent contracting to start being able to provide for their families and pursue the American dream. And so we wanted to convene this conversation to give you guys an awareness of what's going on in Congress when it comes to independent contracting. We've invited two very distinguished and important members of our team. We've got Kevin Hernandez, who is our policy director on the Libre team, and Jocelyn Castillo, who is on the Hill almost every day advocating for the things that we know are going to yield the most freedom, the most prosperity for our community. And so I want to welcome them to have this conversation, to talk to us a little bit about what is the PROACT and the impact that it could have should it pass. And if you're joining us on Facebook later, feel free to still send us your questions via comments, and we will respond to them as soon as we can. And if you're joining us live, also feel free to just send us those questions in the chat, and we'll be sharing with you guys a little bit later just ways that you can get involved. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Kevin and Jocelyn to talk to us a little bit about this legislation and the impact that it could have.
Yeah, awesome. Yvette, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joining right now. Whether this is your first time hearing about it or whether you've heard a few things maybe about this specific piece of legislation and a lot of the ideas that are a part of this piece of legislation, thank you. This is something that would impact several people, not just independent contractors, but it would impact franchisees, joint employer relationships with a company and a franchisee. It would, really, it would have a large scale impact. And we've seen some of that with similar legislation in California in recent times. Most recently as last year with the AB5 legislation that had a strong impact on the gig economy over there and independent contractors generally. And so the PROACT, what we're here to talk about is the piece of legislation that is looking to be advanced in the Senate. But generally speaking, what we are strongly concerned about, and hopefully can get some questions and can get some folks afterwards to join us or ask along any additional points. The PROACT itself, with respect to independent contractors, is something that really concerns us, not even just because we're trying to bounce back into a strong economy that we were in before pre-COVID, and there have been a lot of challenges right all over the country in order to do that, both health and economic challenges. But foundationally, what we believe is that workers should fundamentally have the ability to choose who they contract with, who they engage and join, essentially providing their skills and their work, and their effort, whether that be with an employer or whether that be with a client. So independent contractors, the reason why we're so concerned with this piece of legislation and the impact that it could have on independent contractors, largely is because of what we have seen it do, as I mentioned, in California with an ABC test. So this would essentially be a way that the federal government would standardize how it approaches and how it essentially evaluates whether someone is an employee or should be designated an employee versus allowed to remain as an independent contractor. A lot of what's in the legislation has outlines as to how they would do that. But the strongest piece is there is actually no way of predicting how grave of an impact this could have. There's no way to know exactly how many people would no longer be ruled eligible to be independent contractors. And the big concern is this is with the idea of moving independent contractors to be employees, which, you know, for several reasons, independent contractors engage in this work for the flexibility, for the flexibility of hours, for the flexibility of various contracts that they can engage in. And if a company is forced, or a client is forced to bring someone on as an employee and they don't have the option to continue contracting work to the contractor, you know, that would make some really tough decisions on the part of these clients, of these companies. And for small businesses, which we know in our community is something that is the backbone of our community, it's concerning, because if you run a event planning business, for example, and you contract a lot of that work out, whether it's the AV, whether it's the catering, the photography, these are all things that these are all sorts of contractors that you probably engage with in order to do the work that you do. And the PRO Act is a big threat, not just to those examples, but to the ability for a small business owner to contract out work and reduce the amount of overhead costs, right? Or for the person who is providing that work and serving as an independent contractor to get more clients and ultimately to scale their business. So several things at play, that on the independent contractor side with the ABC test, which we saw similar in California, is definitely of big concern. I'll pause right there and I'll kick it to my colleague Jocelyn, just so she can provide some more context as to kind of what's been happening and what we might expect to see.
Kevin, and I think you underscored how important this conversation is to be had, particularly at a time when we're all trying to figure out how we want to work, what types of jobs we want to do. A lot of the jobs that were available before the crisis, the pandemic, are no longer there. We're going to have to get creative with how to work, where to work from, and what makes most sense for us. Those of us that may need childcare, may want to be home and be flexible. So simply put, this legislation stands in stark contrast to the ideals of liberty that have been embodied in the foundings of this country. And the reason that many of us came here, which is just seeking freedom and our ability to create our own livelihoods. So you set the table very well with what the PRO Act actually does, which would just upend decades of labor law and the flexibility for us to work in our own terms. And I think it kind of gets at nationalizing and determining how it is that we want to work. And I underscore that never has this conversation been more prescient than right now. And so to give you a little bit of context on where this bill is, it's not a new idea. It's been around. We have seen ideas like these pop up at the state level. You notice that there are many people moving from certain states to other states that are doing better. And the reason that is because those states allow for more freedom for the economy to freely flow. And so what this would do is establish standards that other states have established that have ruined their economies at the national level. So this year, the bill was able to pass out of the House of Representatives on March 9th. Along party line votes, the House of Representatives is controlled at this moment by Democrats and is headed to the Senate, where it's been referred to the Committee on Labor, better known as the Senate Help Committee. At this moment, the bill is not moving past that because obviously we have very slim margins given the November election this past year. And so you would actually need 10 Republican votes for the bill to be able to clear, in addition to all Democratic votes. This is in due to a filibuster rule, Senate rule, that requires a minimum of 60 votes for legislation to clear the Senate floor. However, there are many people that want to see this law pass and want to see it implemented across the nation. And we think that they will try to get creative with how to bypass those requirements. For instance, you're seeing elements of this legislation in the more recently introduced infrastructure package that is something that they want to move via this gimmicky process called the reconciliation process, which is a budgetary measure that allows you to pass things in the Congress with a simple majority in the Senate. You would need 51 votes instead of 60, at which point, if they were able to include this in a larger package, it sends a bigger threat of being able to pass, notwithstanding other budgetary restrictions. Also, there's a general push to do away with the filibuster, this requirement that you need a little bit of a larger majority to clear a bill from the Senate, which would really be detrimental, especially on this bill, to our economic recovery now and our future ability to create new economies, a new way of working, and innovate and leverage technology. So while there is no specific timeline on how this bill will move in the next few weeks, it is something that is still hanging over our heads. And I think it's important for those of us that are affected by it to voice our opinions, to share our stories, to contact our lawmakers, to pick up the phone, call your senator, call your representative, and tell them, hey, you know, I like the work that I do. And if anything, I want more options. I want the economy to reopen, to be invigorated, and I do not want top-down solutions that are actually going to restrict me in my ability to work. So that is where we're at right now. We'll obviously continue to share updates with you all as things move, but I think it's imperative that as we understand this issue and its impact in the way that we work, that we become active participants and that we raise our voices. It's very important now more than ever. And Kevin, I wanted to kind of have you go back to this idea of how are businesses, you know, faring after COVID, and what are the types of, you know, this is a question that I ask myself, what are the types of occupations, if you will? You mentioned gig economy workers. There are others that do this full time, some that kind of pair, you know, realtors, for instance, there's construction work, small business owners, artisans. What is the breadth of the scope that this bill would have on all those industries?
Sorry, was trying to figure out how to take myself off mute. No, I mean, that's a great question. And actually part of what is the scariest point, the fact that there is no exact way to know how the government will end up using this tool, this test, to determine who exactly will be okay to stay as an independent contractor, for example, and who has to be reclassified as an employee. The bill itself, the PRO Act, has laid out this sort of test. They call it the ABC test. So they look at what's called absence of control. So a worker who's not under direct control of the client, for example. So say a photographer who is selling some of their products to several different clients, where those clients are not directly in control of what they're doing. So they're selling, say, a certain video to multiple, that would be okay. But then, for example, in an instance where maybe you're a photographer selling your copyrighted picture that you took at I don't know, a baseball game, for example, to a newspaper, that would not qualify under the B part, so the business of the worker, which it would require that the business of the worker is performed outside of the client's usual business. So because a newspaper is normally or usually, right, releasing some of these releasing pictures in a daily newspaper, then they would have to put that photographer reclassify them as an employee, because the service that they're providing or the product is within the company, the newspaper's usual business. So you could see where this is probably concerning for, let's say, transportation, right? And I'll give you an example. My dad down in Florida, he works for a transportation contractor. So he is essentially, I guess, a subcontractor for him. But this contractor works for or provides services to a very large transportation company. There are multiple routes, and that person just does it as an investment. So there's someone who manages the routes, and then the people who drive the routes. The people who drive the routes are not direct employees. They're contractors. And what the head of the, I guess the client is able to, or the company is able to do, is they're able to provide different incentives for work, more flexibility. They're able to compete with other contractors to provide the most incentives to come work for them. So whether it's paying a little more per package delivered than another contractor, like these are sort of examples of the flexibility and the arrangements that are able to be set from this sort of relationship. But that would largely be impacted. And there's no exact way of knowing how many, if not all, would be forced to reclassify as employees. And again, this, not that being an employee is anything that's bad, right? Obviously, but that is certainly an increased cost on any company having to take on employees that normally they would be contracting work out to. So there would obviously be tough decisions being made there. Do you keep that person on? Do you pay them significantly less because now you have to consider them an employee? And this might be a bit easier to kind of maybe think through or to do if you're a larger company, medium, large size business. But if you're a small business, like the event planning example that I gave earlier, where you're doing events in Salt Lake City, Utah, and you contract out for a large event, you have a contractor who helps with AV, you have a contractor who helps with catering, you have a contractor who helps with staging and decoration. These are all things that you may not have the ability to actually have a full staff for your event planning company to do all these different things because it would just be way too expensive. So you contract that out. ProAct puts all of that at risk and potentially forces you to have to reclassify all of these people as employees, which, for small businesses and entrepreneurs is a huge threat.
Can you talk about small businesses and your parents' experience? Obviously, I think a lot of us Latinos, for us, the dream is complete independence, right? So owning our own small business. I know I have a little side gig that I'm trying to start. My mom has been a small business owner for over a decade now. And there's a really interesting statistic from the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor, that says that nearly 50% of businesses are registered and operated from owners' residences right now. And I think, and I mean, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but like the trend is that as this was already a trend that was happening, but with COVID sort of putting, things on stop and our inability to go out and be as flexible, I think that demand for flexible work and business owners having the ability to work from home is probably going to grow. So I think that I love the point that you make, that it's not just, what we like to say, Uber and Lyft drivers. And, I think that tends to be the example that everyone thinks that as the most impacted. I mean, this really would touch a wide array of work and industries. And it's not just employees, it's the business owners themselves that are self-proprietors and are maybe trying to operate from home or trying to run a business internet business or write blogs, etc. So I think that's really important to know. And I just wanted to ask you one more thing. Obviously, we are here to have a conversation about the ProAct and independent contractors, which is just the essence of the American dream. But it does something else that may be worth noting, not quite related, but it would also overturn right to work protections in nearly 27 states. Can you give us a little bit of a sense for how that, coupled with the ABC test and sort of designation of employees, would truly be detrimental to our ability to get the economy going as fast as we could right now?
Yeah, no, I mean, Jocelyn, it's something that we definitely should be putting an exclamation mark on, right? Right now, as we're trying to bounce back through what's been a tough year for several reasons, and our community has obviously felt the impact, and we've seen it. If anything, we've seen the impact maybe disproportionately in a lot of places, both on health and economic impact that our community's seen. What we believe right now is of the most critical sort of nature that we should be approaching. How do we get back to whatever the new normal looks like, but how do we get back to a strong economic path, is, we should be providing workers with the ability to freely choose who they're associating with, right? We should be removing barriers to working, right? We should be removing barriers to entering the workforce, to launching small businesses, to becoming independent contractors. We shouldn't be erecting new barriers to make it more difficult as we get out of this, hopefully, very soon. With the right to work law, I mean, exactly what you were talking about, the right to work laws. I mean, the PRO Act would invalidate that in the 27 states where that currently exists. And the right to work laws, essentially, it's in a lot of states where we currently operate, where Libre currently operates. But right to work legislation, in essence, allows workers to choose whether or not, they would like to join a union without losing their jobs or being forced to pay union dues. Right. So when we talk about voluntary association, voluntary contract, and the ability to freely contract and associate yourself, unions have a place in our history, right, of the workplace. I think if anything, we saw probably at its height during the industrial boom in our country and manufacturing and whatnot. We've seen that since significantly go down. I think that naturally through the changing of how our economy now operates and which jobs are more abundant than others, but the ability to accept a job and know that you're not at risk or you won't be coerced into joining a union is fundamentally something that we believe in, right? You shouldn't be forced to join a union or forced to pay dues if you don't want to. That shouldn't be a contingency upon you accepting a job. And the elimination of the right to work laws, which have been passed in 27 states, the elimination of all of that by a bill right now in the federal government is very concerning on an issue of states' rights, because that's clearly what's been passed and what's worked. And it's worked, right? There are numerous studies that actually show that states with right to work laws have seen stronger economic growth and employment than non-right to work law states. But all of that to say, especially during right now, as we're looking to bounce back, it's definitely of concern.
Absolutely. I think that's just a stark contrast between, and for those of you that are tuning in, we're talking about the PRO Act and the detriments to independent contracting and flexibility in the workplace. We want additional flexibilities. We want those erected barriers to be lowered. We saw some of that happen as the COVID crisis hit, but not enough. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. So this is definitely taking us in the wrong direction. And Yvette, I think that you have some resources that maybe we can share with folks that may want to read more. I know this is a complicated issue, so we're happy to answer any questions, dig deeper on specific area if possible. And of course, as I mentioned, as this thing continues to move through the Congress and those that want to participate and make their voices heard want to join us, I'm happy to kind of stay in touch and continue providing updates on the status of this very detrimental piece of legislation.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn and Kevin. I think that this is so critical to our community, and we haven't heard a lot about it, in particular with everything that Jocelyn and Kevin mentioned, just how critical independent contracting and the freedom to work, the way that makes the most sense for us as we pursue providing for our families, pursuing our American dream. So many of us, like Jocelyn said, have a very close connection, either in our own lives ourselves or our families or parents, of folks who are willing to do whatever it took to be able to provide for their family and just look for that freedom to work. And so that's why we're engaging in this issue as Libre, and we believe that it's really important. So what really matters when it comes to this, and Jocelyn can tell you from the conversations she has on the Hill every day, is hearing from constituents and hearing from those folks who would be impacted by something. And so we want to be a convening platform for all of you to be able to share your stories. I'm going to share right now in the chat the PRO Act toolkit that we have. That's set up so all you have to do is fill out your information, and that will send a letter to your legislator. And so we want to make sure that you are able to make your voice heard. We make that as easy as possible for you. you, but we're also collecting stories. So if you're an independent contractor, whether that's, you're a caregiver, you're a beautician, you work in the, my family has a lot of landscaping independent contractors in their background. We want to tell that story of those who would be impacted by this, like Jocelyn and Kevin said, potentially detrimental legislation should it pass. We want to be ahead of the curve so that we're able to really take advantage of the time that it's in limbo right now to tell our stories and ensure that this does not pass. So my email address is on this slide. So you can send me an email if you're interested in being a part of our story. We would love to collect some video testimonials to put into a video to share on social media. And then also just sharing those stories. Also, if you were invited by a Libre person in your community, feel free to connect with them as well. They are a resource. They are connected directly to us. So sometimes it's easier to just have that ongoing conversation with someone who you already know in the Libre community. But that's what we wanted to take time today to talk about with you all. We're again going to share this also on Facebook for those who are not able to join. We've got all kinds of time zones. I know it's not always the most convenient time. So we wanted to give folks a chance to ask questions. So if you do have questions right now, I think we've got okay, yep. If you have a question, you can go ahead and put it onto this chat right here. I think we did get some questions via text, so I'll just double check that for you all now. And then if you still have questions that we didn't answer, like we said, we've got our information here that you guys can reach out to us, and we would love to be able to respond to that. So we had a question about someone in the pastoral ministry at a small church whose staff is contracted. There is no union right now for that industry. How would this affect, a local congregation potentially?
Yeah, and I mean, not to kind of not answer the question, but it's very difficult to determine how exactly the federal government is going to really rule on these various situations of someone being a contractor. But I think a few things just maybe of note would be the ABC test. So I believe it's in the toolkit that we just sent here. But you can give that a look. Essentially the proposed test or tool that the government would be using to determine whether someone would have to reclassify or not. Again, we don't know how strict or loose they will be interpreting that, or how exactly they'll be fully interpreting that. But with respect to a pastor and contractors at the congregation, it's difficult because you'd have to look at sort of what work they provide as contractors, yeah, it's difficult, but the biggest concern is that there's such gray. Exactly, there's so much gray around who is safe, or who is at risk of being reclassified as an employee, forced to be reclassified.
Is it fair to say that if you fill out a 1099 when you do your taxes, that's something that should be a flag for you, that this could impact you?
I think that's actually probably a good way of looking at it. Yeah, not to say that 100%, right, you would no longer be able to contract out your services, but I think that's a good sort of benchmark to use, right? Like if you use 1099, I would definitely want to stay up to date with what is going on with this piece of legislation and how maybe it's clarified, or how it's changed, maybe if it does get changed while the Senate discusses it. But I would definitely be very mindful if I was working under a 1099. I would stay up to date on this over the next few months, definitely.
Awesome. Well, I would like us to continue having this conversation. I know that Libre, if you don't like us on Facebook yet, that is probably where you can see the most of our updates as things come through the rest of this legislative cycle. And again, your local Libre folks, if you're connected to a Libre community, but we want to be that information source for you all. We do think that this is an affront to the potential for a strong economic recovery and economic prosperity as a whole. And so we want to to be at the very forefront of this. So I just want to thank you, Jocelyn, for the work that you do day in, day out on behalf of our community and so many of these issues. And Kevin, a constant source for us in terms of just really diving deep and understanding, which is so much, again, also what we want to do as Libre, is to be that source of really understanding what's at stake when it comes to policies. So thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for everyone who joined us live. And if you're joining us on Facebook, please feel free to share your questions with us. Oh, yes, David.
Yes, I'm driving, so I cannot type in right now, but how come, I think we need to expose a little bit more of this, because a lot of people that I talk to, they don't know anything about the PRO Act, because you don't see nothing nowhere. So I share the info with some people, and because of the time they're working right now, so they could not join this conference. But we need more exposure. I want to help. I'm talking with Eddie Jarim, and I say, you know, we need to expose a little bit more about this and tell people that they need to vote no. Because like me, I'm a 1099.
Yeah.
And my job will be affected if that goes through.
Absolutely. So, thank you.
So
go ahead.
How can we be able to help more, and how can we expose more about this new law?
David, yeah, obviously, thank you for calling us and for, you know, taking the time right now during the middle of the day over there in Nevada. I would say, yes, Eddie is probably going to be your best point of contact. Any of our teams out in the states, all the states that we're in, they're going to be your best points of contact. But exactly to your point, this is not an issue that is talked about in the news. It's not very, it's not catching any headlines, right? And so that makes it even more concerning because it can fly under the radar. And luckily, it's not something that has been signed into law. So there's still time to advocate and to educate others, right? Not just others who, use 1099s, but just other people in the community who it may or may not impact, so that they're aware, can engage, can take action, and hopefully have an impact so that this doesn't become law, because there's still a window of opportunity for us to have our voices heard. And it's, people like you, like Eddie and others who hopefully we can, sort of build that coalition out in Nevada and in our other states to continue raising awareness, or start raising awareness, to your point.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jocelyn, go ahead.
I think, the link that Yvette put on the chat, if all of us could just sign it right before we sign off, that's step number one. It goes directly to your congressman or congresswoman or senator's inbox. And also picking up the phone and calling them. They need to hear that this isn't okay and that there's constituents that will be affected. And lastly, sharing your stories. I think that there's powerful things that happen when people are aware. Sometimes some policymakers may not be aware of the impact that a law might have. And I think that sharing those personal stories is important. So those would be my first three steps. And then, of course, working with our staff to see what else can be done to have more events like this, evangelize others, and share with the rest of the community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Kevin and Jocelyn have said. This is the beginning. This is our first conversation on it, but we really do want to build a momentum of support, and the storytelling is a big part of that. But we also know that we're just a platform for our community. And so we will also look to you who are in that industry, in that space, have a network of folks who would be impacted. We want to hear from you as well. What can we do in Nevada? How can we be more informative? Do we do something on the ground there? Do we, collectively get more folks to record their stories and send them out to different places? So we are also, as much as we want to lead this conversation, we're also very open to hearing from you on the ground in terms of how we can really get this message to the folks who would be impacted the most. So you were a critical part of that, and I really appreciate your commitment and desire to be involved. We do have your contact information, so I'm glad that we can stay in touch, and hopefully this is, like I said, just the beginning of how we get the word out about this potentially detrimental legislation. Does anybody else have a question before we conclude? I don't want to miss out on anything.
Can I make another comment?
Sure.
Because I was looking, I hear about this through my company. They mentioned about this ProAct, and I found a website that says opposetheproact.com. Is that a good website to use to send to people to sign and oppose this new law?
You know,
I don't know if you guys know about it.
I'm unfamiliar with that particular site, but I know that, you know, like we've said, the link that we have on here, and I can send it to you also after this call, is pretty simple. It's a very simple form with some very, you know, quick top line and overview on what the ProAct is, and it's a quick way for you to make your voice heard. So I'll look into that website myself, but I'm not as familiar with it.
Okay,
yeah, and David, I would just add, look, we're really trying to increase our efforts to raise awareness, because we want lawmakers to know that this is going to impact the Hispanic community all across the country, and that they should be hearing from Hispanics all over the country, right? So
Excellent.
That's also, I think, why I would definitely recommend, I mean, signing the letter, but connecting with Eddie, because it's important that they hear from our community.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, David. All right. Well, gracias a todos for joining us. Again, thank you, Kevin and Jocelyn, for a really engaging conversation. And everyone who joins us later on Facebook, please stay in touch with us as we, you know, aim to move the needle on this and protect the freedom to work. Thank you all so much.